Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this roundtable, day 2 of the musical ethics lab, number 2, at the Académie der Künste. My name is Christopher Williams. I'm the artistic director of what we'll be seeing and hearing at 8 o'clock, and what we saw and heard last night at 8 o'clock. And I'm sitting here with a variety of interesting people that we're going to have an opportunity to hear from in just a couple of minutes. I'll make those introductions now. On the far end is my colleague, philosopher Joshua Bergerman from the Musical Improvisation and Ethics Research Project, in which this whole thing is taking place. Then we have Jonas Tinius, an anthropologist based at Saarland University who specializes in ethics and performance. We have here 3 musicians from Splitter. That's Steve Heather, drummer, who's been participating in this 10-day workshop and concerts. Sabine Vogel, flutist, also member of Splitter. Irena Lehmann, Theaterwissenschaftlerin, performance scholar, who has also worked before with Splitter. And Magda Myers, who plays clavinet with Splitter. And at the far end, my other colleague from the research project, anthropologist Caroline Gatt. So we'd like to begin by offering everybody on stage a few minutes for solo, so to speak, thinking about how your work relates to the topics which we've been discussing over the last week, and perhaps how you saw that reflected in last night's concert. I'd like to begin with Jonas Tinius.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm really humbled to be here, and it's great to especially have witnessed in some ways yesterday's long discussions in the evening after the performance, which I think in some ways was already a kind of open round table that gave a lot of input to what I'm going to say. So welcome everybody. I'm very jealous that you can experience the performance later on again. Like I was just saying, sadly I have to leave later because today's the Einschulung for a lot of kids in Berlin, so I have to take care of family matters, as it were, afterwards. I would just like to say a couple of things that might clarify, might spark, might provoke perhaps some thoughts, and I want to situate them in particular because I think it's helpful to have certain kinds of positions outlined in this conversation, because there are a lot of concepts and a lot of practices that each of us experience differently, and I think it's good to start from a situated position. Mine is that of an anthropologist, a social anthropologist trained in the study of theater and performance. I accompanied the Theater an der Ruhr, which is a public-private theater institution that was founded in the Ruhr Valley in Mülheim an der Ruhr, close to where I was born too, in Oberhausen, the city where Christoph Schlingensief was also born, maybe one of its only claims to fame. And I accompanied this theater for a long time, and I was especially interested in practices of rehearsing. So what the practice of rehearsal does to one's understanding of oneself as an actor, but also as a human being more generally. And I was very interested in the ways in which practices like rehearsing, but also like improvisation, contribute to the building of an institution. So to what extent an institution can build itself around certain kinds of artistic reflexive practices, rather than top-down understandings of how theater has to be. Since 7 years, I've been working on museums and curatorial practices here in Berlin, especially critical curatorial practices against the backdrop of what one could call Napoleonic imperial heritage narratives, so especially focusing on the Humboldt Forum, which seems like it's quite a sort of a way off from our discussion today, but actually I think relates in different ways. The first thing I wanted to say, and I'm going to say 2 or 3 things that I suppose position myself in this debate about ethics and what I understand by ethics, but some of them are also responses directly to the 3 introductions that you've offered yesterday on stage, and I kind of found it very interesting how you positioned certain, how you, as it were, presented certain assumptions about what improvisation and ethics means. I think the first thing I wanted to say is And this kind of relates to an anthropologist who inspired me in my work, called James Laidlaw, who said that the anthropology of ethics is concerned with the evaluative claim that it's not concerned with the evaluative claim that people are good, but actually with the descriptive one that they are evaluative, meaning we're interested in the ways in which people make decisions as to what is a good practice, what is a bad practice, not with an assumption or with a proposition that they are good or bad. So we're interested as anthropologists in the situated practice of understanding how people make those decisions rather than making those decisions ourselves. I think that's a very important general point that I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make is inspired by, again, somebody who's really been central to my understanding of ethics, and that is Michel Foucault, and especially his late writings, and again, especially his book, The History of Sexuality, the second volume of which, in which he basically makes it very clear that for him, and I quote here again, morality means a set of values and rules of action that are recommended to individuals through the intermediary of various prescriptive agencies, such as the family, educational institutions, churches, and we might add theaters, cultural policy makers, etc., etc. But then he continues, and this is really the important thing for me. He says, another thing is, apart from morality, the way in which we conduct ourselves. That is to say, and I quote here, the manner in which one ought to form oneself as an ethical subject, acting in reference to these prescriptive elements that make up a moral code. And this is really, I think, the most important thing for me to say, that when I speak of ethics, for me, that means the ways in which we relate to moral codes. That is to say, ethics has nothing to do, in my understanding, with something that the last comment that ended the conversation yesterday evoked, which is to say, the assumption of what a good practice is. It's not about creating ethical standards or ethical codes. Ethics is about how we relate to codes. So our rejection, our refusal, our affirmation of something, and the way in which we pick certain bits from that and work on ourselves. This is, for me, how we form ourselves as ethical subjects. And from that follows something which I think is quite crucial, which is that there are not just ethical subjects, there are also ethical fields. And those ethical fields, and this is something that is very important to me, especially speaking to professionals like all of you, are not just situated in the everyday. So a lot of scholars, philosophers, anthropologists have been working on what they call ordinary ethics. That is to say, the ways in which in our everyday lives we make decisions about, where I send my kid to school, how I should dress, how I should behave, and so on. And they argue that basically we make most of our ethical decisions, the way in which we relate to moral codes, in the everyday. And while that may be true, what I'm particularly interested in are situations that one could call, and this is how I call it, extraordinary fields. It's a bit of a, of course it's a bit cheeky, but by that I refer to situations like the improvisation yesterday, like the workshop you've been doing or the workshops you've been doing. Basically situations that are set aside, as the theater scholar Tracy Davis might put it, that are perhaps not in the everyday, not in the ordinary, that are set aside from the ordinary and create a specific situation. And those could be rehearsals, those could be theater practices, those could be trainings, those could be therapy, all kinds of situations that are basically not everyday, not ordinary. And it's those moments that I find particularly interesting. And I do find particularly interesting, too, the fact that there are professionals who spend their entire life, philosophers, dramaturgs, directors, actors, musicians, thinking about those extraordinary moments in which we have, as it were, a heightened awareness of the importance of relating to moral codes. So those are things I'm particularly interested in. And now maybe just one or two responses. If I'm not already talking too long, I don't really know what I guess I am. So I'll just keep it very brief and say that the first response to the introduction yesterday that I found interesting was you stated that improvisation is part of ethics. That's already an interesting positioning, because to say that improvisation is part of ethics already implies that one can change or one can play within certain structures. And that's not what classical moral philosophers would say about morality. you don't play with immorality. It's something you have to enact, basically. And so if you say that improvisation is part of that, you're already positioning yourself and saying, we can relate to moral codes. The second thing is that ethics is situated. That's also, you said this in relationship to Aristotle. That's already a very, very specific situating, as it were, of how we understand ethics, that it's not universal, that there are specific contextual forms of ethics that may not apply to everyone. I think that's very important to understand. And the third thing, and this I just want to throw in and then I'll pass it on, is the role of authority. It was incredibly interesting, and I love those moments when a performance is over, or one thinks it's over, and you look around, and as an audience member, you wait basically for the first person to make this kind of nervous attempt to start clapping. And yesterday, especially, nobody started clapping until at some point you kind of stood up or made a gesture, and the audience assumed that the performance was over, which of course it wasn't at that moment. But what that showed, that there was an end and a beginning, or a certain kind of ritual. And those moments where norms and authority and discipline come into improvisation is what I find very interesting too. Yeah, just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, this is a hard one to follow, but I'll give it my best as a drummer. Because I just thought straight away, it was quite interesting reflecting back on our working process, because there was one day where we improvised together, and then we went around in a circle and we talked about how we felt that improvisation went. And what for me was kind of interesting, and I think because I feel like we've really kind of touched on the tip of the iceberg of what this whole thing is about. And in this response, everyone was kind of like, this is how I felt, this is what I liked, this is how basically it was like how I felt and what I liked or what I didn't like. But to me, it was like, I was hoping that we would go a bit deeper, because it felt like these ethical things of why we did that, why do you do that, why do we stop, and you also talked about like cultural references. Like, it's sort of really interesting to me because we're a band of many different cultures, many different backgrounds, many different educations, many different non-educations. We all approach music very, very differently, as also we saw in the conversation yesterday, because people just, even though some of us have played together for over 12 years or longer, there's still very different approaches. And I was kind of hoping at some point in other conversations that we would actually stop talking about what we like, but like what and what we don't like, but what are the things that are forcing or causing decision making in the process of the improvisation, and where that comes from. Like, what's the background? Is it not just musical genres or styles or thought processes, philosophies, concepts, but upbringings, religious, la la la. I mean, we touched on certain things, like Matthias talked about a trombone tentet that he wrote, and it was really interesting because he talked about the placement of this tentet in a church in Cologne, and how that was confronting for him because of religious connotations from his upbringing, and all these sorts of things were super interesting. And I was hoping, or I'm still hoping, considering this is the beginning of a much longer process, that we can delve far more deeply into this area and find out a few more things. But I'll move it on.
I just wanted to say something about the ending yesterday, because I think this was, we started with silence and we ended with silence, and there was this tension, and we let the tension go, and this was the moment when the audience clapped. So I didn't feel like there was a gesture like, now you can clap. It was more like we hold the tension because it was still part of the piece, and then we let it go, and then the audience immediately got it. So that was how I perceived it.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome to respond or to start a new solo.
Yeah, I would start a solo somehow, just to explain also how do I come into the picture and everything. So yeah, I as a theater scholar study music and music theater mostly. And there's also these staged concerts and concerts who go into the performative, and that is somehow I ended up with I came into the Berlin experimental scene, and so I was very excited yesterday to see you also using the whole space and doing this, which is also an important part of improvisation in my view, like to use the space and find out how it is sounding. And I think this is maybe also which relates to ethics, this working from a situation and what is there, what are the like the obstacles or the materials, what is the potential, and I think this is really a different approach than to like standard or traditional composition where you start with an idea and then you try to put it into material or into sound. And yes, and I think this is a very interesting question, like coming from the theater side. I thought, what does improvisation mean to us in our field? And so there's mostly going back to commedia dell'arte practices, like from the 16th century, where they play a lot with stock characters. So they have fixed characters that come into play, and they have parts of plot structures and also jokes that then, like the running joke that we all know that comes from that tradition. And of course, through opera, they also infused into music theater. So I was thinking, but every time there's a new situation on stage and where you use material, where you use stock characters, and I also thought maybe for the musicians an interesting or a question which I'm very interested in is, what are your stock characters, what is your material where you somehow also have traditions with, and that is something that's interesting to me, because often when you talk about improvisation, then you have it's either against these composed music, everything is thought out before and laid out and planned, or you have this totally spontaneous thing. And I think this dealing with traditional materials or also materials that you have invented in a rehearsal space, so that there's something in between these two very, very strong opposites. Yes, this is my first question and input, and I have some more, but I don't need to tell it all at once. Yeah, but maybe it's to you.
I'm just maybe a general thought on the relationship of ethics and improvisation and how I perceived it in these last couple of days. I think ethics is always about relationships and relating to other people, to the room that you're in, in the case of musical improvisation, to your instrument and to other players and also to the audience. And for me, all these relationships were kind of looked at under a microscope this last week, especially the relationships within the group, and what it actually means to have this decision-making process. What the decisions are based on, maybe. And in musical improvisation, because it's non-verbal, it gets really complicated, because a lot of misunderstandings can arise. And as Steve pointed out, we have so many different approaches and cultures and approaches to improvisation as such. And personally, I find it to be quite a complex process, which is both intellectual, emotional, physical. So I might base my decision of playing a sound simply on an intuitive urge to perform a movement, or I might intellectually analyze it and think like, maybe I should play now because I've been silent all the time, or something like that. So these kind of relationships and questioning why we make decisions is something that this past 10 days have been about. And I think then it's always ethical, and then you're always dealing also with, you can call it power or like hierarchies in general, to just observe what is going on. Yeah, and I find that very interesting, and I think in improvisation that all of that, and with the number of people that we are in the group, all of that is really amplified because nothing is set. Yeah, so that's been a really interesting process, especially what Steve pointed out, when you get to know members that you thought you know quite well or you're friends with and you play with in many different contexts. When you get to know them deeper and deeper and you're, okay, then maybe something shifts. And that made it that process really interesting.
I think so. I think I'll just start something slightly bit fresh, but in a way that responds to some of the things you've been saying, because I don't know if the audience knows, and I don't know if I'm giving away your secrets, but Splitter is first of all, it has a long history. It's 12 years, right, that you've been playing as a group, and they're very dedicated to how decision-making processes are made in the group. Not in relation to the musical material that is played on stage in the concerts, but the social decisions. How are we going to do this? When shall we meet? How should we structure the relationship with this project? And I found that like long-standing attention to decision-making processes amongst you in the group was first of all unexpected, because I didn't realize that this is how you worked. But also, how does that then, because Magda, you mentioned that, for example, when you're playing, the decision-making process is non-verbal. But as a group, you're extremely practiced in the verbal decision-making as well. So one of my questions is like, first of all, do you find that the verbal ones are less, lead to less misunderstanding or not? Or, I don't know, it's an open question, for maybe not for now. But then also, I'm very curious to know what a musical misunderstanding is. That's something I'd like to know. And then coming back to, like, Steve, you mentioned these individual histories. So maybe, I hope the musicians know, but I'm going to be working on life history interviews, right, with different musicians, specifically to have a focus on this, like, where do people come from, these paths. And there's an anthropologist called Anand Pandian who wrote some beautiful work where he's looking at how do traditions influence the way people make ethical decisions. And rather than finding that the tradition is something which is very coherent and you inherit a very sort of like structured, unchanging tradition, people's actual, or the people he worked with, the way that they picked up bits, or eclectic bits from film, from sayings, from song, from scripture, the way that tradition is built is also fragmentary. So this process of how you all come together may be unique or not to this certain situation, and I'm very curious to see how it plays out. Yeah.
I'd just like to quickly say something about misunderstandings.
Yeah.
Because we've had that happen quite a lot, and it's beautiful. Like it's, I think it's it's sometimes frustrating, but there's some of the most amazing moments. I think I'm talking on behalf of the group, and I may be wrong, because it's hard to talk on behalf of 20 people and be 100% correct, of course. But we've had times where, like, we've made an agreement of structure and things like this, and someone or some people have, it's obviously completely misunderstood. But from that, something unbelievable has occurred. You know, like there's been someone that's kept going where everyone else has decided to finish, or there's been some structural misunderstanding, and so then hence everyone's gone, okay, now that's happening. We all readjust and shift. I mean, it doesn't always work out positively, but in general, it's been the surprise. We're all built to adapt, and we're all kind of what's the word for it? Kind of like not dying to, but like we're always on the tips of our fingers, wanting to respond. And so when something completely unpredictable occurs not through a way of, it also, this is the the thing, if it comes from a place of genuine misunderstanding versus an intent to corrupt, it's completely different. But even the attempt to corrupt can be really entertaining. But if it's a genuine thing of a place of misunderstanding where that person is following through with an idea and they genuinely believe that this is the right thing to do and it's working, then everyone else is like, holy shit, this is great, and goes for it as well. And it's beautiful. And then we have it built into us a way that we have to, I don't have to, but want to relish those moments and make the most out of them. I think most people in the band, I'm not speaking on behalf of everyone because I can't represent everyone 100% of the time.
I have a very quick answer just on one aspect of your question of like, I think you said the non-verbal versus the verbal communication, and is one more difficult than the other, or do we find the, I mean, I also, again, on behalf of everyone in Splitter, I think it's pretty clear that the discussions, the verbal discussions we have can be much more complicated, exhausting, and time-consuming than the communication is musically. And I guess there are many reasons for it. One that comes to mind is maybe that the verbal discussion, there's always, we want to solve an issue. There's a practical or like some kind of goal that needs to be achieved, while when we play a piece of music, of course everyone wants to have a good time and we want to play it, you know, a nice piece of music or whatever, but that's like so broad, it can be anything, and there's way more possibilities, and so that's one very obvious thought.
I just wanted to continue that conversation a little bit, because yesterday, for some reason, the word failure also came up at some point. I can't remember when, but somehow it just struck me because it's so interesting. I mean, not just in the context of, I suppose, art in general, because it seems like art itself cannot fail, which is always something that somehow has just been, I've just been interested in, which is partly a capitalist problem. You know, every exhibition opening has to be a success. I mean, you know, what is a failure in these contexts? I think that's part of a systematic problem. But I think in this context, it's very interesting that what you mentioned, a misunderstanding, actually, rather than leading to sanctioning, as might be the case in social practice, where, you know, I can't remember who, but somebody spoke about social life as being ruliness, you know, the ruliness of social life, the fact that we notice this especially in this weird kind of post, midst COVID time when we try to give somebody a hand and maybe it's not quite right, and, you know, we're trying to find the right way. In some way, one is constantly being sanctioned and, you know, tries to find a different way. But I think what you just evoked is a different mode of being, which is a misunderstanding or a potential failure of adhering to an agreement actually is not being sanctioned, but it's rather taken up as an inspiration for something else. And I think that's a very interesting way of thinking about relations, because I completely agree. I think relationality is completely central to this, not just in the sense of me and somebody else, but also in this conducting oneself. So, you know, in this relationship that we have to ourselves. Hence my question yesterday about this kind of like, do I hold myself back? You know, at what extent do I sanction myself in this practice? So I was very interested in, you know, does actually failure then basically not exist in some ways? I mean, is there such a thing as something breaking down, you know, or is it essentially a potentially endless loop of creativity?
I mean, I would say this is improvisation. So, because now there is no mistake or failure, I would say, because, I mean, we are trained or we learned or whatever, where it comes from, we are kind of flexible and we can be really fast in situations, and maybe in music better than in real life. But yeah, this actually, for me, this is improvisation. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely subjective, of course, and really tricky, because often we come off stage, and I've had many a time where we've come off stage and I've felt completely dissatisfied, but it's a total personal, subjective viewpoint, and it's difficult because you can come off stage and I find it's ethical thing, whether to sort of say that was shit to someone, to other people in the band, where the other people in the band have had an amazing time. And it's the same, like I think it's, or do you say that was shit and express your opinion and say, this is what we agreed upon, this didn't happen. And then, but yeah, but in my perspective, it did happen. And it's like, and the discussions are important, but it's also, it's the thing of, you have to be careful or not to be careful. You know, you can also not be careful, lay it down and see what happens from that. But it's, and I agree, I find it really interesting. I think this whole musical practice is like a reflection of social structures and how we can, I don't think it's been delved into enough, or maybe it has and I'm not aware of it, but of how the improvisation or improvisationary practice with ensembles relates to kind of like cultural practices and how we engage with each other in other forms of organisation, and I don't mean just corporate, but like other structures within school, in education, for example, and things like this. And yeah, I wanted to say something else, but I've just slipped my mind. But it's definitely very, it's hard. It's hard to sort of say, and failure. I think sometimes if you feel it's a failure, but it doesn't mean that's a failure for anyone sitting right beside you. And so it's, and whether to acknowledge that or to, is an ethical question.
I kind of have a question for the artists, but also for the scholars as well, perhaps. Just building on some of the themes that have come up that Jonas introduced in the beginning, this distinction between sort of ethical fields and morality more generally. And I think one of the characterizations of our age is that we are much more aware that certain moral codes are in a sense optional, or so even going back 50 or 100 years, I think a lot more things were prescribed either through like religious tenets or something, but even just I think a lot of social ways of dressing and things. You know, you walk around Berlin, it looks a lot different than Vienna did in the 1800s, for example. And there's a long story, I guess, of how that came to be. But it feels like one of the big roles of art now, I think, is taking that place of sort of searching for new ways of being, for searching out, well, what are our values now that we can't take any values for granted? And it seems like the artistic place, you sort of mentioned that, you know, there's a ritual element to gathering here. It's a safe place. It's kind of separated from our outdoor world, ordinary ethics, you call it. And you mentioned this role as well of the ritual place of theatre and sort of gathering people together to sort of share an experience and to, I guess, to understand how they are. And because we have less of a sense maybe now of understanding who we are, or that identity is more up for question. We have more possibility to assert our own identity. I feel like in your music in particular, I have this real sense that you're often striving or trying. There's a sense of finding things, a sense of searching, finding things which are new. The failure that comes into this. It's, you know, failure is part of exploring, part of searching. So my simple question is really, what are you searching for?
Simple question.
And that doesn't need to be necessarily a musical response, but as artists, as human beings.
May I suggest we open this now to the audience? Because there are probably more than a handful of people who would like to chime in on that.
Could we ask the audience also what they are searching for by coming to something like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are you searching for by coming to something like this? Let's distribute a couple of microphones. I'll give this one to this hemisphere.
Maybe I can also. Sorry, I wanted to jump in on this notion of failure. Also, I mean, there's this great Beckett thing with you always have to fail better, and but I don't know if you get with that to somewhere, to some point. But maybe to this failure, is there something also like a negative aesthetics in what you are doing? Like, do you have in mind, oh, I didn't want to do this, or I don't want to do this? Because obviously you are an ensemble of experimental artists, so I guess you also have these ideas about what music is and can be. And do you work in this field of positions? Is this important to you?
I don't want to be the one talking all the time. That's the thing. I'll
say something.
Great. You go first.
I don't know if I would use the. I mean, the failure has negative connotations. You could. Yeah, sure. You could use surprise. You could say risk taking. I think that's something that people would describe improvisation with, like having to take constant risks, and also searching maybe for surprises, to answer your question, Josh, to surprise oneself, to surprise the audience, to surprise each other, is, not necessarily discovering something new as a new material, but like maybe get to a point where you haven't been, which will give another perspective. But to the point of failure, I mean, I think that happens on a very micro level very often. For me personally, in an improvisation, like it's not like the responses I have in my head when I hear something always come out. They might come out completely differently, and you can practice as long as you want. It's not, you can't get there necessarily. So you might describe that as a failure, or you might go like, oh wow, that opened up other possibilities. So in that sense, you could say it fails all the time, or most of the time. And I know that if Andrea Parkins is here, she who's also a member of Splitter. Failure is a topic that we have personally also in our duo talked about a lot, because she works with a Max Patch where that's kind of built in, like this kind of fragility of not knowing what happens and something breaking down, and that's also an artistic method. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, it does also happen, that you want to do something and then it's hard to describe, but sometimes I do something and I've never done before in an improvisation and surprise myself. And now you can talk about this was not intentionally or whatever, it happened, but I like the word surprise more, like, so this is risk-taking, and it's a surprise, and it can go in a good way, or like, okay, maybe it was not such a good idea, but it's not a failure. It's not like a drama or whatever. But there was something I wanted to say about the music. I think this is also something we talked a lot about. It's like, what is our I hope I understood you well. I'm right. It's like, what is the group sound, or do we have unspoken rules in this band? And we found out there were some rules, but nobody really talked about them, and they were just in our heads actually, and they were not really there, but some people thought they were there, which was kind of interesting. And I think since it was kind of a phase of we had last year, and since this was put on the table, I think a lot changed in the band about how we play and what we do. That was very, very door opening somehow.
Can I just quickly say something? In response to Josh, what are we looking for? I also think apart from musical content, we're looking for community, right? So it's kind of like because this band is much more than people playing music together. It's about, of course, it's about social infrastructure and togetherness, and we're all kind of I was thinking about it this morning It was in the shower or something like that. But it's like we're kind of also coming from very different places, but also from a very similar place. And by being together, of course, we're much stronger. And it's like we're from pretty much similar socio-economical backgrounds. We're from different cultures, but we're all dealing with similar problems, like how to survive. And we're really incredibly fortunate to have this structure and someone like Patrick who's helping us stay alive. And without him, we wouldn't be alive. I don't think, or we would be alive in a completely different form. But to have the opportunity to do this with these wonderful people would be completely not possible. But it's like, but going back to the beginning, it was basically putting people together to create community so we can share. And within the band, there's people that run venues, there's people that run festivals, there are people that have record labels, there's people that have children, or single parents who are like, and we're all there to kind of, not just, but to share and to kind of help each other get through things. And I think that's really, really, really important, because it's much more than finding musical solutions. Like, and through this working out how we get together and how we function and how we survive together in difficult times or great times, the music is just one element of all these other things. So it's incredibly important.
Steve said already half of what I wanted to say, but also empathy, response, and support. I'm looking for that, because I don't find it so often in our society. And not only through music, of course, also through our connections, real life, I'm looking for that. So, yeah, it's very important for me.
Yeah, I really like the question, what are you searching for? It's super important. You asked this. And interesting enough, in this project, when we talk about ethics, we always talk about how we act to each other, how we relate, how do we listen, but we don't talk about the aesthetic stuff so much. But we are a group of artists who are performing in an aesthetic frame. We are in a concert space, audience is coming to listen to music, to sound. So even though our music is very much informed by the way we are acting with each other and letting space or not, at the end we have a result of sound. And I think there the less ethical or the friction start, because we don't want the same. And also my question is the most ethical way of playing the most interesting result in sound? So maybe the music could be so interesting if half of the time only one person plays, and then 20 play for 3 minutes. It could be super interesting, but it's not happening because we are so ethical to each other. Yeah, maybe.
Any other comments or questions from the audience?
I have some mic. Can I?
I found this question very interesting of these unwritten playing rules, and of course you all have different backgrounds, but still the result for me, in my perception, was quite coherent yesterday. So the energy was super channeled between all of you, and so and I think Josh talked about punk rock yesterday and how your values kind of create the aesthetics you're playing, and also what Andrea said. So I'm just curious how your everyday life values inform your practice, but also if they are challenged by other people, because you have different backgrounds and of course different ideas about life, then how does it go back to your ethical values in life?
If I understood correctly, one part of your question, how do our everyday values translate into our music? I mean, personally, I would just say I'm not a different person in my everyday life than I am on stage. So it's translates one-on-one in a way, like directly. It gets maybe transformed and channeled through different, well, it's a complex situation, but definitely I think everything feeds into the music. Your past and your values and what you listened to and the conversation you had in the morning and all those kind of things. So I would say it, feeds into it directly.
I agree in this, and maybe this goes also back to Irene's question before with the traditions, because I think we are one, we are many, but we are one person. So it's like all my experience I have, where I grew up, how I grew up, whatever, it all informs who I am. And I can't just leave this out of the door and say, I'm a splitter now, and I'm a complete different person. That does not work, I think.
It's interesting though, because I've been thinking about this quite a bit too recently, about like genres and things like that, and how you work on certain things for quite a long time. Like punk, I've played with punk musicians. I wouldn't call myself a punk musician necessarily, but I might be. But I've also been really interested in different things like Indian music, African music. I've talked with Josh quite a lot about this, and you delve into these things, and you go, I have a tendency, like either it's whatever style of music or it could be electronic music production, and it affects what you are, what you're playing. And sometimes I find myself in the group, or in music in general, where you start to think, have I gone down there too far? Or am I doing this, it's a really interesting question, because like sometimes playing in the group, I might have in my imagination, I don't know if other people work like this, but I have things in my mind where it sounds like something, it's in a certain world, and I'm playing with that world, and it might have references to Indian music. For me, that's just for me. But then there's a point where it's like, I have to make a decision how far I'm going to go with that personal reference in relationship to the group. Does that make any sense? So it's sort of like I can go punk rock as far as I want to, but then there's a certain point I have to sort of take into consideration what's also, I don't have to, but I would like to, because I'm trying to be musical with the situation that's around me. And so it's this constant negotiation with yourself and your references and the others, and it's a real challenge. And it's also something as a musician that you're, even without other people around, it's like this thing of how deep do you go into it, because every sort of genre of music, for example, or thought or activity encompasses your whole body and your whole life and everything like that. Like if you're getting totally into punk music or to Indian music, for just saying those two things, there's a certain kind of, it changes you, you become a different person, or the other things enter into you. And then you say at a certain point, is that enough now? And because that's the beautiful thing about music, is it's you're collecting. I like to think of it like that. That's me personally. It's like a collection of materials, and it's this beautiful thing, just musical, but the rest of the life is all the rest of it as well. But it's like, is that far enough? Have I gone far enough in that? Or do I just leave that for a little bit because it's taking over? So it's sort of like within the group, it's also this thing of like, how far do I go? And it's a decision, aesthetic, ethical thing of your lines and the others' lines and things like this constantly.
I think Kai had a question before. Or a comment. It's gone? Oh, okay, Kai. There is a person.
Okay. Yeah, so, my question is, did you discover something previously not so ethical about your playing? because I mean the European appropriation of improvisation, it has a lot to do with let's say an experience, but also performance of friendship, of an ethical relation. Every jazz band gives the impression that the players are friends, even if that's not true and they're just professionals. So I think it's not too difficult to congratulate oneself as an improviser as how ethical one is, and that can be a good thing because we need to reassure ourselves of our values, and congratulating ourselves is a good thing in that context. But I wonder, so I wasn't here yesterday, maybe you've already discussed it, so I wonder whether in the process that you've apparently gone through, did you discover something profoundly or slightly not so ethically developed in your practice?
I'd like to say it's a constant negotiation. It's not a status quo where you go like, oh, now that we've done this and had this workshop or a research process, we discovered we're all friends and hence we're all ethical with each other. It's something that's negotiated every time we go on stage. And it works out sometimes and it doesn't other times. So I think if you looked at it, for sure, there are decisions that are not ethical being made in a concert and others that are very ethical, but it always depends on the person's perspective, to perceive it as such. So,
I would also throw
did
in...
I answer your question? No.
Well, I don't know if it's so subjective. I mean, aren't there some experiences where some people would agree on that this didn't go so well from an ethical perspective? I mean, because ethics is something we do share. It's not just a subjective, super personal issue. No?
Well, I disagree. I think we all have very different values and base our actions on different values. And but if you mean it in a very general sense of giving space and taking space, for example, in a musical context, then that's what I meant, which is negotiated all the time. Giving space to musical ideas and such.
I think another theme here as well, and Jonas mentioned this in the beginning, is when we're talking about ethics, we're not necessarily saying more ethical is better, is good. It's like everything we do is ethical because we all have these values. So the thing you're talking about exactly. So the more interesting question is, why is it important in the jazz culture to appear friendly, to be friendly? What do they want to show? Why is that not important in a classical music context? Why is it? I mean, this is not to say that's unethical. There's a whole series of values in this kind of music, which is shown not only in the ritual of going to the theatre and dressing up and how they wear, but even the style of the music. And so I think, the more interesting question is like not what is more ethical, but why are these things important to these people in this situation? And what is, maybe a deeper question, is what is sacrificed? Or, by valuing this, and this becomes more prominent, what becomes less prominent?
I also wanted to say something that Steve said before about this. I think also if you play in a group with 21 people, you play different than you play in a duo or a quartet. So this is already also an ethical decision that I play less, but it's my contribution. It's not to play always. And then now I want to say something to you about jazz bands. I mean, sorry, I studied jazz, and that's not like we are all friends. And I mean, especially as a woman back in the 90s studying jazz, no. There were a lot of not ethical situations, I would say.
I guess one should also distinguish between, let's say, actually being friends and the performance of being friends, because that's one of the values that's embedded in the jazz tradition, is this myth of democracy. Yeah. And that's a whole other conversation. We can have that round table next year, maybe. But it's important to make that distinction. Andrea Parkins is jumping up in the air. She would like to say something, and I would like to hear it.
Yeah, I guess I want to talk about the performance of friendship, which is not the same as friendship. And I, we can talk, we can talk about, I also studied jazz and was in that context, and it is very particular for women, particularly of a certain generation, several generations. But there's also, like if you talk with someone, for example, that worked with Charles Mingus or Jack McDuff or any of these people, it really wasn't so friendly, and that was also a performance of a certain kind of machismo. And then also, don't forget, I mean, at least in American jazz, and I don't want to say what happened when American jazz musicians came here, and then there's also the European jazz scene is another thing, because I'm not really capable of talking about that. Perhaps what looked like camaraderie and friendship was pure survival in a context where it wasn't easy to be perhaps mainly a black band traveling in the United States and the South. So you need solidarity. It needs to look like friendship because it's really life and death.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. My pocket buzzed a few minutes ago, and we're reaching the end here. Would anybody like to share a burning question that we haven't addressed?
Any final remarks from our panel?
What are you searching for? I'm waiting for the answer.
Can you say it into the microphone? Everyone needs to hear this.
No, I would like to hear what you're searching for, like the answer to your question. A couple of minutes ago, you asked all of us, but I would like to hear it from you. What are you searching for?
I think I already answered. I said perhaps it's surprises and getting new perspectives, getting into situations I haven't been in and learning something new. Yeah.
Can I answer very briefly? So, as a researcher, I actually want to do this research in order to live a good life. And sometimes it's constantly separated out, right? The research has to be objective, it has to be, but I want to do this to learn how to be a better person. And I don't know what that means, but that's what I want to do.
It's very interesting.
That was a much nicer way of answering what I was going to say, which is... But essentially, yeah, how much of what we're doing here in art and this kind of exploration is an analogy, or is actual like almost a fractal microcosm of our larger world. So what we can find here again, how these like close-up situated ritual practices that we're doing here can actually inform us in our quest to live the good life.
For me, it's very interesting to get a set of answers, and I'm very happy with this conversation because for me now it's more clearer that ethics and improvisation is on these two levels of relating to each other as a group and what personal things we bring into it, and then there's the aesthetic level of I found this very beautiful what you said, Steve, that the question, how far do I go into something? Is it enough what I have done? I think every artist is constantly dealing with that, and there you have also this connection to how much do I maybe like the audience angry with me after I've done too much noise and I've been too loud or whatever, like this thing you always have, and for me these two levels of relation and aesthetics are connected, and yeah, I'm always happy when I found these connections.
I want to find in this project a way to carry forth. I guess that's a way of saying also what Caroline said, that I want to understand for myself what the good life is as a musician and a thinker and as a human, but maybe it's less ambitious in the sense that I just want to have a slightly better grip on what my guts are always telling me. How do I continue? What's important? What am I not seeing that's important? So it's kind of, it's a propeller, let's call it.
Growth. I mean, that's the thing, like when you're in a workshop like this, there's so much reflection about what you do, who we are, what what we want. It can be exhausting, but it also helps you to grow, and that's I think that's something I'm searching for.
Challenges. This for me is a big challenge because I'm really terrified of talking in front of public people. Playing the drums, cool. Talking, I'm sweating from here down to here, so challenges.
Before the performance as well. I was quite moved by what you said because, I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily about finding the right life. Adorno said there is no correct life and the wrong, but to understand how people live good lives and to try and pick things that work for one and for others around oneself to make something slightly better. That's maybe what I'm looking for.
So shall we continue this conversation in half an hour musically?
Yay!
Thank you for coming.